Any updates on the coaching search? I'll give you one if you want. Liam Coen had the 8:30 interview, and I'm not just saying this because you would expect this to be the answer, but it went really well, maybe even better than expected.
Wow.
I can tell you it went extremely well, and I will tell you, and again, maybe what are people going to say? It went lousy? No, I know that, but even with that as a disclaimer going in, I can tell you it was a really good interview, and he is firmly, in my opinion, entrenched as one of the two guys to beat in this. Now, I've said that all along, but the interview process exacerbated that in my mind, that it is Ben Johnson, Liam Coen, or bust, in my opinion, on how it will play out. That's not me saying how I feel it should play out, and my God, if they don't get one of those two, shut down the franchise.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of good candidates, and whoever they wind up with, there's a chance could be pretty good because they've worked hard to vet those. But in terms of how I think it will play out, I've said it over and over. I'll say it one more time with authority. I will be surprised if the next football coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars is not Ben Johnson or Liam Coen. I will be surprised if it's not one of those two coaches.
Do you think that they've made kind of a decision that it will definitely be an offensive coach?
I don't know that they've made that decision. That'd be unfair. I'd be reaching. I'm not going to speak for Shad and Trent. I don't. That's not fair to say what they've decided in their mind. They know that more than anybody else does, and for someone to say here's what they're thinking is not fair. So I can't say that. I can tell you what I think based on just trying to read the tea leaves, follow it as close as I can, talk to as many people as I can. That's where it's going to be headed. That's where it's probably going to be headed for a number of reasons, not the least of which is the most important thing this coach has to get right is to get the quarterback right. And so do I think, because it's a good question. It's a fair question that you asked. Do I think they've decided that? Only Shad and Trent know that answer. But do I think that's where it will definitively land? Yes, I think definitively so. Is that what they've decided? Only they know that. And I'm not going to say, hey, they've decided, because that's shame on me. Shame on anyone who says that. There's only two people in the world that can tell you what they're thinking, and that's those two people. But I would be shocked.
And I probably asked it the wrong way. I mean, obviously, they're not hard and fast to
I'd
something
be shocked
because
if it's
they're
not.
interviewing Brian Flores.
Yeah.
But
who's a good candidate.
Right. And they've interviewed defensive guys, but your feeling is it's very highly likely going to be an offensive-minded
I'd
coach.
be beyond surprised.
Yeah.
I'd be beyond surprised if it's not. Now, I'll say that, and I'll announce tomorrow that it's Aaron Glenn. Okay, right after I say that, then I'll be the biggest dummy in town. But I would be beyond surprised. And I'm not saying that just because it's the narrative either.
Yeah.
I think you know me well enough to know, and I think people that listen to the program do, I don't follow the narrative very often. The narrative last time was it was Byron Leftwich, and I tried to scream into the mic as many times as I could. It was never going to be Byron Leftwich. I saw it again today somewhere on Twitter that, Byron Leftwich would have taken the job, but he didn't want to work. That was never the case. He was never offered the job. He was never going to be offered the job. That's no knock on Byron. That's just not where they ever were. And so, but I will tell you this time, I would be very surprised if it's not an offensive coach.
It's interesting. I was thinking about this today because we're obviously so entrenched in the search, as we should be. But it's interesting in the sense that, and not that we don't have months to eventually get to this, but it's like there's been very little discussion about like the team and like what they need to do and the decisions that will need to be made. I mean, the clock doesn't stop. I mean, the new league year is coming, March 14th, and but it's just hard. It's hard to get to any of that stuff.
Well.
And in terms of how you feel about the roster and things like that and the biggest needs. And, I mean, even like going as far as what should they do with the fifth pick in the draft, because everything is so in totality focused on who the next leader of the club is.
Well, you're right, Hayes. And the comparison is when Frank Gore made the first down, all we ever talked about for the next 4 months is how fun it was going to be having Trevor Lawrence. We didn't talk about the fact that there were other positions too.
Right.
So it's the same thing. We were focused on that, and now we're just locked in on who this coach will be. I think one of the reasons is, and again, I want to be clear about this. If you would have asked me, I think you did ask me, when the season ended and who are the best candidates, I said I'm not going to get into that while there's a coach here. It was number one, my relationship with Doug Peterson. Number two, my position as the play-by-play voice of the team. I didn't think the right thing to do was to start speculating on who the next coach should be when the Jaguars had a football coach. Once they no longer had a football coach, which is the position now, I thought I could move forward. Once that day happened, you asked me who would be your first choice, and I said my first choice would be Mike Vrabel. And you even said your follow-up question was even ahead of Ben Johnson. I said it would be, and that was my answer. So it was an offensive guy then.
That was also Robert Kraft's answer.
Yeah, well, it was too. But the minute Vrabel was off the board, and the minute you knew he was going to be off the board here, then I think Ben Johnson was everybody's guess. But it was only later that I felt like I asked around enough and poked around enough that I was confident that that's definitively where they were headed. I wasn't convinced of that. And again, to your point, they're interviewing Brian Flores today. Brian Flores is a good candidate, man. If you told me tomorrow Brian Flores is the next Jaguars coach, I'd be happy about that. I'm not saying it'd be my first or second choice, but I think he's going to be a successful head coach. That whole toughness thing and that edge and all the stuff that the Jags seem to have lacked, all the stuff of all they didn't have in 17 or 18 in that stretch, 16, they had an edge, boy. And there's no that. I mean, they might have had as good an edge as there was in the league, and that's what they might not have had. Well, the minute he gets off that plane, well, they'll have that. That's what I loved about the whole Vrabel hire. Well, Brian Flores, I think Aaron Glenn, I think Mike Vrabel, maybe it's defensive guys, but not just defensive guys. Something about those guys, I think that would have that. So if you told me tomorrow Brian Flores or Aaron Glenn were the new Jaguar coach, I'd be elated. But I don't know that I'd be more elated or as elated as I will be when I find out that it's either Ben Johnson or Liam Coen, which I'll say again, I'm convinced it's one of those two.
Yeah, and I would say like I think obviously I hope it's Ben Johnson, and I think it will be Ben Johnson. If it's not Ben Johnson, then I would pivot more to a defensive. I wouldn't hire Liam Coen, and again,
yeah, and you said you've been consistent on that.
I just don't feel like he's done enough in the league yet. I mean, he had a spectacular year this year. I'm not taking that away from him, and he may be on his way to being the next Ben Johnson. But I just don't think that he's done enough yet in the NFL to warrant being a head coach. But so if for whatever reason they can't get the Ben Johnson deal done, then I think a defensive-minded head coach makes sense. I mean, let's just again look at Flores. I would be a little worried about Flores just because of the trouble that he had in Miami. Now he says that he's changed, and hopefully he has. But forgetting that, what I would be really excited about, when you watched Minnesota defensively this year, they had games where good seasoned quarterbacks had no idea where the pressure was coming from. I mean, of all the defenses that I saw this year, and I really think defense now in the NFL is probably at its lowest form that we've seen it. It just feels like there's really no more elite defenses. There's teams that play defense better than others, but there isn't a defense in the league right now. Look at the playoffs. Look at the teams that are left in the playoffs. Would you say that any of them would rival even like Jacksonville of 2017? I just don't think. And part of it is the rules. Part of it is the nature of the spread and becoming more of a factor in the NFL. Part of it is running quarterbacks, making it more difficult. But it just seems like it's so hard to play elite defense now in this league. But I will give Flores credit because he would bring something here that, in my opinion, when's the last time the Jaguar defense was like remotely interesting when it came
he would bring a nastiness.
When it came to surprise, and throwing people off and exotic blitzing and things like that. So, so I do think that would be a great asset to the club.
If they hire you don't like the Liam Coen hire, and you've been, and again, if it winds up being Ben Johnson, which is what I think and what it sounds like you think too, then the rest is moot. But I'll say, but because I think Liam Coen is really well positioned to be the Jaguars coach, if it's not Ben Johnson, that's my opinion. If they hire Liam Coen, it would be the same mindset is when the Rams hired McVay. Now your point is McVay was the coordinator for 3 years before that and a position coach before that, so the resumes are different. I get it. But when the Rams hired Sean McVay, he had only worked for one NFL team, the Washington football team. He was 31 years old. That was almost unheard. 31. When they hired a 31-year-old head coach who had only worked for one team in his life, that was mind-boggling. And people said, "What in the world are you doing?" But there was a belief that he was a boy genius, and it was worth the while. It worked out. And so if they hired Liam Coen, it would be the same thing. Now, he's 39, not 31, and the background's different. But my point of the concept is, what are you doing? He's only been a coordinator two years. Well, same thing. They believe he's a bit of a boy genius. So they'd be trying to capture the same magic that the Rams captured when they hired Sean McVay. Unlike Johnson, who sort of waited his turn a little bit. Even though, by the way, Ben Johnson's younger than Liam Coen. He's 38 years old, and Liam Cohen's 39 years old. But, I mean, they would be trying to capture the same thing. But back to your point about Flores. We've said this all along. There are two very distinct categories of potential coaches here. There is the offensive mind who's been an offensive coordinator who presumably would come here and either continue to call his plays or bring in someone who would call plays just like him and would bring that offensive imagery and that offensive thinking and that imagination and that ability to develop quarterbacks to Trevor Lawrence and Brian Thomas Jr. and develop them as young players. That's the theory. That's the Ben Johnson, Liam Coen, Joe Brady, whoever. That's the theory with the young offensive guy. The other theory is bring in the tough, hard-nosed defensive guy that Vrabel is and who just went to the Patriots, that Flores is, that Aaron Glenn is, that Patrick Graham is, that there's a toughness and an edge. And the two things this team needs is an offensive mind to develop Trevor and Brian Thomas Jr. and a defensive guy to bring back that edge and toughness on the defensive side of the ball. And it needs both, which is why those are the only two guys that are being interviewed. The retread isn't interviewed anymore. Not for this job. The guy the Mike McCarthys of the world were never going to get an interview here. No matter how long. Pete Carroll was never getting an interview here. So the retread wasn't coming here. It was going to be one of those two the young offensive guy that could think the way through and develop the young offensive players, or the young, hard-nosed defensive guy who was going to bring the toughness and the edge back to the defense. And by the way, that's the collection of interviews. I'm relatively confident from what I think, plus what I hear, that it's going to wind up being the offensive guy, one of the two offensive guys we've talked about. So I will say this. It's exciting now because I won't say we're nearing an end, meaning we're going to see a coach shortly, but I think we're pretty much nearing the end of the interview process. I mean, is Joe Brady tomorrow?
I think. And then I don't think there's – is there one beyond him?
I don't think there's one scheduled.
Yeah. I think that would be interview number –
11?
11?
I don't think there's one.
Maybe even –
is it more than that?
I think it might even be 12.
Is it 12? But regardless, that's where we are. And I think knowing that that's kind of where this thing is, my gut tells me that we're nearing the next step of the process. I guess that's kind of the point. That's kind of exciting.
It is exciting. I'm ready.
Yeah, I think we are. I think we have a city that's ready.
Yes.
Hey, Nia here, and thanks so much for watching 1010XL Jaguars. For even more coverage of the Big Cats, be sure to subscribe to 1010XL Jaguars.